story coming out of New York with the mayor allowing this piece of legislation to come through, giving non-citizens the ability to vote, 800,000 of which, not Americans, as we just heard in Rudy's report there. What's the story here? Why would Adams, if I'm not mistaken, did he not raise caution over this during his campaign? So why has he allowed this to go through, and what does this all mean? Joshua Philipp.
Well, yeah, so some of the Democrats here, they've acknowledged that they don't believe this is legal, but they're passing it anyways. It actually does violate the New York Constitution, the state constitution, and so Republicans are suing to overturn it. But basically, I mean, they wouldn't do this if they wouldn't believe that it would give them some kind of political benefit. If they believed they were going to give these people citizenship, if they believed they were going to give them voting rights or whatever else, and they were going to turn around and vote against them, they would never do it. A lot of this started during the Obama, when Obama was still president, when they determined that, these individuals, when they get citizenship, they tend to vote about 80% Democrat. And it was after that the Democrats went from being really pretty strongly anti-immigration. Remember Bill Clinton era and Eli Gonzalez and so on. Remember that? They went from being really, really anti-immigration, especially because the unions didn't want it, to being very, very pro-immigration. And the reason was, again, is because they determined that about 80% of those people are going to vote for them once they get the ability to do so. And so here now you have Democrats giving them the ability to do so without even becoming citizens.
What is the strategy here? New York City is already a blue state. Do you see this spreading to more contested swing states?
So in New York, I would say that they wouldn't do this again if they didn't believe that they had to do it. And they've taken this step by step. There's a few possibilities with them. Let me explain. The step-by-step process they've taken is one, they started by giving them driver's licenses. And a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservatives in the state were like, well, you're starting to legitimize these illegal aliens, these people who shouldn't be here in this country. Like, no, we're just going to give them driver's licenses because, a lot of them drive without driver's licenses. And so this will be a way of making it kind of legal. And they're like, okay, fine. That's one step. And they're like, okay, now we're going to make it so if you have a driver's license, you can legally vote. And so, if they have a driver's license, they can legally vote. And all the Republicans and conservatives are like, wait a second, but you're giving driver's licenses to illegal aliens. Isn't that going to give them the right to vote? Like, oh, no, our Constitution says we can't do that. We would never do that. Don't worry, it's fine. Now then they grant them all free health care and so on. They give them all these benefits. And then now they're giving them voting rights in addition to all of this. And so it's a step-by-step, slow boil of the frog process. There's been a lot of different debates on, really, I think, how much entrenched control the Democrats have in New York. Because you did have Silwa, who ran as one of the front runners in the recent mayoral elections here, and really had a pretty strong shot at it. A lot of people thought that he might have had a good chance at winning. He didn't in the end, but I think that scared Democrats enough where they wanted to really entrench their power. In terms of the spreading to other states, though, New York and California tend to be the ones leading the charge, and so what happens in New York tends to spread. And I guarantee you that if they can do it, despite the fact that if the New York Constitution says that you have to be a citizen to vote, it violates the Constitution. If they can do something and through their packed courts, still manage to pass it, because if maybe they can find a judge who will not determine that it violates the Constitution, even though you can read it and it says you can't do that. They might try to do it elsewhere in places where they believe they have enough control, including of the courts.
It's kind of interesting because, I'm kind of confused by the whole situation. In the same breath, the Democrats will say something along the lines of, well, we have to make voting easier because it's so difficult to get voting ID. Yet they're able to say, okay, well, at the same time, we can make it so illegal people who are not here, non-citizens, can vote easily. So what is it? Is it nobody can get voting ID, nobody can figure out how to vote, or is it so easy that literally non-citizens can?
Well, this is where I think a lot of us are confused now because, Yeah, so even Biden himself was suggesting that if you have to make a voting ID process, he said specifically that Black Americans and Latino Americans, that they're not going to be able to figure out how to do it. And you had a lot of comedians online posting videos where they're poking at a laptop with a stick, like they can't figure it out or something, joking about it. But at the same time, the Democrats, as they're saying that minorities in the U.S. aren't able to figure out how to get IDs to vote. They're the ones also saying that you have to have an ID if you want to go to a restaurant in New York. That you have to have your vaccine ID if you want to go see a show. That they were even forbid talking about making it so that some of the supermarkets here would even require it, which is, next level bizarre. You have to have your vaccine pass to go buy food at that point. They have no problem doing that. And somehow people just, I don't know how, but they don't make the connection that, wait a minute, they said I don't know how to get an ID to vote, but I have to get an ID to do just about anything in the city. So, the other than voting. And so these things just don't connect somehow.
But it seems like they're not really all that concerned with the optics of all of this. As long as their agenda is what they're pursuing, it seems to me like they couldn't care less if the optics are bad. Would you say that?
Well, I think this gets into the realm of information control, because they do have pretty entrenched control, not just within the systems, when you get to states like New York, but I think they also control most of the media, especially when you get to the Latino communities. They don't really have strong independent media. And you have your CNNs and your major, three-letter broadcasting networks that tend to pretty much run the whole show. And if you're on Facebook or different types of social media, you'll find that and Google, most independent media are suppressed. At the very least, you'll find that the establishment media do get additional benefits, whether it's in increased search results or otherwise. And, who controls the narrative? Who controls the interpretation of what's being said by the politicians? Well, it's these media organizations that are heavily politically aligned with these political, hacks, I guess you could call them, who shape the perspectives on all this. And they're told that if you step outside that little boundary, that little bubble you're in,
hold that thought.
It's racist or something.
I'm sorry, Josh, to cut you off, but we have to go to a quick break. I wanted to ask you as a follow-up to the story out of the 800,000 non-citizens getting the vote in New York, what you think the chances are of the RNC's lawsuit against this. Do you think it will stop it? What do you think the outcomes will be?
Well, this is going to be a real test of the New York legal system. Because in plain written language, it violates the Constitution. It violates the state constitution. You have to be a citizen to vote in an election. It's plainly written. The Democrats who passed it, there was a city council that passed it and the mayor signed off on it. Some of them acknowledged that it's not legal. They acknowledged in their own words that they don't believe it. They believe it may not be legal to do it, but they did it anyway. And they're trying to prevent even inquiries into it because they say, well, it's already passed. Let the past lie, so to speak, and don't question it.
Yeah.
But again, we will see we'll watch now the integrity of the New York legal system, because in plain language, it does violate the state constitution.
Do you think? You live in New York. Do the citizens of New York do they want to continue to do this? Is this something that most New Yorkers want?
So I recently left New York. I'm in New Jersey now, but I still work in New York. Yeah, I escaped. It's not prime real estate here, but it's leagues better. Let's put it that way. But yeah, I've been surprised by New Yorkers, and because I look at the things that are happening. Going through the Upper East Side, where you have more of the wealthy New Yorkers. You have increased violence. My wife is on some of the chats there, like the Facebook groups of some of the people. They have Facebook groups for like moms in that area, and you do find that a lot of them are really concerned about their safety now.
Yeah,
and this is where it's getting politically in New York. They're starting to realize that their political decisions are impacting their basic safety, where they're afraid that they can't even call the police if they're under assault, and they're afraid the police won't come to their rescue. They're afraid of going out and going to the store and getting assaulted on the street and, in plain broad daylight, and basically not having any way to defend themselves or having any kind of legal recourse, because they're realizing the political decisions they've made are now impacting their basic quality of life. But despite this, and this is what's really surprised me, they don't equate that with the party. They don't equate that with Democrat policy overall, even though technically the policies represented in New York are really representative of the overall Democrat agenda. They equate it with one specific leader. They'll equate that to de Blasio. They'll equate that to Cuomo. They won't equate that to the party. And it's much like you have these, communist sympathizers who say, oh, that wasn't communism. That was Maoism. That was Stalinism. That was Leninism. They equate that with the leader, not with the system itself or the overall body of politics itself.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. But one thing you had mentioned that kind of triggered something in my mind was you said that you were talking about, I was surprised by New Yorkers. And, we always hear New Yorkers are tough. They don't take anything from anyone. Yet we see, and I guess I say this at risk of getting kicked off of YouTube, is we see this mass psychosis being put in throughout all over the U.S. and places where you would think, oh, these people we're Americans. We stand up. We're rebellious people. And we've had this mass psychosis where everybody has indoctrinated themselves into buying into everything that's going on. Even if they hate it, they refuse to do anything about it. What have you seen what this mass psychosis and how everybody's saying, oh, there's no mass psychosis, fact check, false. Have you seen any of that? And what do you see there?
Yeah, I think the buzzword going around right now is mass formation psychosis, which is the phrase you would use for this type of mental behavior, I guess, where if you were to step back and look at the whole picture, and it's something I've been talking about a lot, not just on my show Crossroads, but in written articles as well, is really what we're engaged in is a psychological war. Modern warfare is not guns and tanks and bullets and so on. It's not like that anymore. In fact, I'd say it hasn't been like this even since the Cold War era, unless you're fighting, in some proxy war between two large nation states like Afghanistan or Vietnam or whatever like that, right? The large fully developed country, modern warfare is psychological warfare. We've been waging culture war, we've been waging ideological warfare, and the battle is really between the ideas of socialism or the ideas of freedom. And this is being won or lost through what you choose to believe in. Do you hold on to your faith or do you abandon your faith? Do you hold on to your values or do you abandon your values? And you're bombarded with new ideas and new interpretations of reality. You're being sold a false history, like critical race theory and 1619 Project and so on, where you're told that you can get actual benefits if you choose to abandon your principles and abandon your sense of patriotism or whatever else. You risk losing your voice if you don't choose to adhere to this new ideology that's being presented in front of people. And this has been going on for a long time. I saw you guys have G.K. Chesterton as one of your sponsors. I'm a big fan of Chesterton, but he was warning about this even in the early 1900s.
Yeah,
that this type of stuff was happening. In fact, he had a magazine called the G.K. Weekly, where it was dedicated to writing about things just like this. This has been ongoing for a very, very long time. And I would say the challenge, the reason I think you don't see Americans mobilizing in any kind of way or getting together in any kind of way, I would say actually Americans are. It's just they don't see the others doing it. They don't see that others think like them. And I'd say it's because we've lost the town square. We no longer interact person to person. And even more than that, all that's moved online, and the digital town squares, the social networks, are all heavily censored and heavily controlled. All it's going to take for that wall to crumble, though, is for a new platform to come about. We'll see what happens with Trump's platform, Truth Social, which releases, I believe, mid-February. Maybe that will change things. But I think as soon as Americans start seeing, oh, I'm not the only one who thinks this. Oh, wait, most of us think this. That's when you start seeing change.
We have just about 4.5 minutes or so. I want to ask a really quick follow-up question on this, but then I want to ask you about the Fauci gate. Get your opinion on that. So, real quick, New York got a new governor. You got a new mayor now in New York City. Kind of a big change for a lot of New Yorkers in such a short period of time. Were there hopes that the new mayor was going to be much more moderate, much more centric than the last guy, or did we think he was going to be more of the same?
Like I was saying, a lot of New Yorkers, the entrenched kind of mentality a lot of them have is the problem is not the system, the problem is the individual. And again, one of the biggest problems they've had with the system is the fact that they don't feel safe anymore. They voted in a new Democrat mayor, believing that he was going to change things because I believe he's a former police officer. And BLM threatened literally violence. They threatened blood on the streets if he increases law enforcement, and he seems to have folded. One of the first day one policies released was that they decriminalized prostitution, they decriminalized most theft, they decriminalized most crime. And so New York is mostly lawless now. You can do almost anything other than murder or violent crime. Whew. And so they went the opposite way.
Escape from New York is coming back to my mind at the moment. We're not far from there, walling the city and calling it a prison colony. All right, we'll have to leave that there. 3 minutes on the clock. I want to talk about Fauci. We had the Project Veritas report come out with the DARPA documents, and now House members have released some emails. Is Fauci, are we seeing the final throes, or is this kind of just a flash in the pan? What say you, Joshua Philipp?
It's hard to say. The big issue with Dr. Anthony Fauci is his cooperation with EcoHealth Alliance, which was working directly with the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China, this virus laboratory where they were conducting gain-of-function research in conjunction, again, through this NIH program through EcoHealth Alliance. They denied on record, testifying under oath, that they were not doing this, but it's now coming out that they were in fact doing this. It's hard to say whether this is the end of things for Fauci because the system protects him. If this were a Trump Trump era type appointee stuff, you'd have Democrats calling for blood on the streets. They would probably charge him, for lying under oath. But they're not. And this is, again, the issue you have when the systems of justice and all the systems that would go after someone for violating the law are controlled under specific political interests, and it's not in their political interest to do so, it seems.
Wow. The guy's got 9 lives. Is this your fingerprints? Yes. Well, it's like nothing matters. And that's, I think, one of the points I made yesterday was no matter how much evidence we seem to have that, in fact, he did support gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab. I mean, you did a whole documentary on the source of the origins of the COVID pandemic, and it seems like it doesn't matter. We could literally say anything, and it doesn't matter. So it's startling. And I encourage everybody to check out your documentary film, which you can find on Epic TV. Go to the Epic Times website, and you can find a way to watch it there. TheEpicTimes.com. But Joshua Philipp, host of Crossroads Highlights, Crossroads on YouTube. Check that out. Make sure to like and subscribe and share. Thank you for your time today, sir. God love you and God bless you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for hour number 1. Praise be to God.